all the hackers here at DevHacks really appreciate it a lot.
No problem. Thank you. I've been doing this for 6 months now, as the rest of us. These virtual calls, and it's still weird to give talks to my computer screen instead of actual people. But first, I wanted to say, welcome everyone who's dialed in, and also thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. I know, we're a good chunk of the way into a hackathon, and it's hard to take time during that sort of hectic thing. And so thanks for taking the time to listen to what I have to say here. I hope you're all having like a really fun time. Hackathons are, to me, sort of one of the most fun things you can do. It actually ties a little bit to what I want to talk about today, which is like I've always gotten a lot of excitement from what small groups of people and individuals can do to make big change in the world. And hackathons are kind of like the distilled essence of that. So, thanks for inviting me to speak here.
Yeah, that sounds great. So right before we start, I will just give like a short bio of who Dave Camp is, and then he will get right started with his keynote. So Mr. Camp joined Mozilla in 2006 to work on Gecko, building networking and security features, and was a contributor to the release of Firefox 3. After a short stint at a small startup, he came back to join the Firefox developer tools team. And now, as the Senior Vice President of Firefox, Dave Camp leads the global team of engineers that build, test, and ship the Firefox family of products and services. He's responsible for making sure everything is on time and high quality.
All right, well, thank you. Yeah. So like I said, what I want to talk today is the power of individuals and small groups of people to change the world. This is like the thing I believe in most in the world. It's the thing I'm most excited to contribute to. It's what attracted me to working on the web and open source in the first place. It's a promise to give everyone the ability to build things, find users, spread it to the people that want to use it, and build software and share it with the world. And I've been doing this for a long time now. And the thing that I found excites me the most about these sorts of teams, these sorts of people, is that ability they have to do more with their time and their effort than they should be able to do, if that makes any sense. The kinds of people who can get more done in the world, can have a bigger impact on the world than what they could ever do by writing code themselves. And so I wanted to tell a few stories about some of these people that I think exemplify some of the characteristics and strategies that these sorts of people have, these sorts of teams have. Hopes that you can learn something from them like I did. Hopefully a little faster than I did. One note I want to make before I jump into these stories here, this is what I'm talking about here is a little different than the sort of 10x programmer myth you may have heard about. This isn't the people who can single-handedly do everything all by themselves. Those people tend to run up against the limits of how fast you can type on a keyboard pretty quickly. Skill and craft is great. Some of the folks I'm talking about are, of course, able to get a lot done. But what I'm focused on here is that kind of impact that's larger than any one person can have on the world. So I'm going to start with a person who helped really get me started in my career. His name was Miguel de Icaza. In 1997, he started the Gnome project to build a desktop environment for Linux. Story's a personal one for me. I'm trying to stick to stories that I've personally been seen or been involved with. That's partially to keep this a little interesting so that you're not hearing stories you've already heard, and partially just to show you that these kinds of people are everywhere. We can all learn how to be like them. There's nothing magical about it. So in 1997, Miguel started a project called Gnome. It was a desktop environment for Linux. I was still in college. I got interested in that and I signed up to help with their website. And they gave me no questions asked. They gave me a CVS account, which is old timer, similar to Git. It's where they stored all their source code and software. They gave me an account to help with their website. And then I, as I was prone to do back in my college years, I gave up. I lost interest and went back to my personal learning programming projects. 6 months later or so, I went back to look at how this Gnome project had grown and what new software they'd been building. And I found that somebody had stolen the name of my personal pet project, right? And I thought, darn it, Somebody stole the name of my project. Well, let's see what they did with it. I clicked on it, and I realized it was my personal project. It was the very first version of that personal project that I had first tried to check into my personal software repository. It hadn't worked at the time, and I realized in that moment that what had happened was that first time I'd messed up and checked it into the Gnome projects repository instead of my own one. And I was mortified. It was the most embarrassing thing that had happened to me professionally in my life at that point. And so I, after pacing the room for about 10 minutes, I finally sent an email to Miguel de Icaza, the founder of the project, and I said, look, man, I am so sorry that I dumped my dumb little learning project into your repository. Can you please delete it and then take away my access so I never make a mistake again? And he responded really quickly, like a couple minutes later. He said, I can if you really want me to, but what I'd rather is that you keep working with us and you keep working in the public with us as part of our team. And actually, I know another guy named JP who's been working on something pretty similar, and I think you and JP should talk to each other. And I think you may be more effective together. You may be able to do more together than just doing it off each alone. And so I did. And a couple months later, Miguel came to us again and said, like, hey, this guy Marine is working on some other similar things. You might want to work with him too. And this was sort of Miguel's superpower, right? He's a pretty good programmer. But the Gnome project still exists today, 20 years later. I'm not sure any lines of code Miguel wrote are still there, but the teams he built, the people he helped inspire, bring in, teach to work together, still going strong in that community right now. And so I think that's the first strategy I would suggest to anyone that wants to have a bigger impact than just what they can do themselves. It's to really invest in your team. Real impact's rarely about the work you can do by yourself. Building and contributing to strong teams, that's how you're going to have the most impact, right? Like I said, Miguel's code, I'd be surprised if any of it is still in the Gnome code base, but what he was able to do to build that team, and he's gone on to build other teams like that. He's a world-class team builder. He's been able to have a huge impact on the industry, and it's all been about the teams he builds rather than the code he's written. These teams focus on the change they want to make. If you're finding yourself in a team, and I know some of you are doing that right now in this hackathon, and these teams are always at their best when they're really focused again on that change they want to make, the impact they want to make on the world. When the whole team is working together to have the same impact instead of each trying to show off how smart they are or choose the technology that's most interesting to them at any given time or whatever, you can make some really great stuff. These teams, these great teams, they're curious about what everyone brings to the table. The other cool thing about Miguel was at the time, for me at least, he was this rock star programmer that I thought was, way out of my league programming wise, but every day he would start, every conversation he'd start with so what are you working on? He was more curious about what I had to say than saying what he had to say for the most part. And that kind of stuff is really great. And then, some of you early in your careers, investing in your team, making sure your team is strong, focused, working together. It's not just the job of the team lead. It's not just the job of the founder. Everyone can help increase their impact on the world by helping build out these great teams, helping bring people in and work better as a team. So that's my first strategy, invest in your teams. It's a great way to multiply your impact on the world. All right, the second story, the second person, the story starts on March 17th, 2018. The Guardian, the New York Times reported that Facebook had given access to millions of users' personal data to a company called Cambridge Analytica. Pretty big scandal. You may or may not remember it. It was kind of for many folks, it was the first time they really saw what the threat of online surveillance was, how much data these folks were actually collecting about us. And 10 days later, on March 27th, Mozilla released an add-on called the Facebook Container that helped you separate out your Facebook browsing from the rest of your browsing. It was a really great story that we were able to tell. Like, it took us 10 days to see this problem, react to it, and build a whole new way to protect you from it. But that's not actually how it happened, right? The way it happened was, one engineer, Tanvi Vyas, she's a principal engineer at Mozilla, and had been working for years on her personal mission to make internet use safe, secure, and private for normal people. It's not uncommon for security folks to take this sort of paranoid or puritanical approach to security. Like, if you don't want Facebook to spy on you, just don't use Facebook, don't sign up. Tanvi had been working through ways to let people continue to use the things they wanted to use. She didn't want people to have to change their behavior just to get privacy and security. And so actually for years, she'd been working on this idea of separating out the different types of person that you are online. Sometimes you want to be with your friends on Facebook, sometimes you want to be working. And she built this technology called the containers. And what was really impressive and interesting to watch about Tanvi is she had this mission, and she did not let anything get in the way of it. She was a security researcher and software developer. She wasn't a UX designer, but there weren't any UX designers ready to work on this, so she did the UX design herself. She built the front end, she built the add-on, she tried to distribute it, she helped people know it was there. She did all that upfront work to get done what she wanted to see done in the world. And that meant it was sort of sitting there when the Cambridge Analytica thing happened. Somebody else, I actually forget who, said like, hey, what if we just took this, containers add-on, this container technology, and instead of asking people to configure, why don't we just make it work for Facebook specifically? And, really easy for someone who's more focused on themselves and their ego to say, no, my UI is right, let's just ship my UI out to the world. But Tanvi took this to heart and said, like, she took that feedback, she threw away her ego and said, yeah, let's just do it. And so really that like 1 week turnaround, success story was a sort of multi-year in the waiting, end result of somebody who had spent a great deal of time knowing exactly what she wanted to make happen in the world and working toward it without ego or limitations. And so that's my sort of second strategy here. Be focused on the change you want to make. Like, there is no substitute for having a clear, simple mission. If you're someone like Tanvi or some of the other folks I've worked with, Miguel starting the desktop project, you have a personal mission and you're trying to get it done. But this is true if you're part of a team. That team should have a clear mission. And the people that have the best impact on those teams, the people that can do the most, are the ones who are intensely curious about what the goal of their work is. Why are they doing it? Not just what are they trying to do, but why are we doing it? What are we trying to achieve? When you have that kind of clarity, it helps so much in avoiding getting caught up in these like little details at the end of the day don't matter. So, and then finally, like, be willing to step outside of that comfort zone. Like, I'm an engineer, so I'm not going to design UI. Well, if we need a UI and there's not a UI designer, sometimes an engineer needs to design. Similarly, we have designers at the Mozilla project that, they want to see something happen and there's not an engineer available, they'll pick up their code editor and get it started. So when you really know what change you want to make in the world, it unlocks a lot of doors. Last thing I suggest people do is like think through the impact you personally want to have on the world. Not everyone's going to have one of these. I sort of started to realize later in my career that what I'm talking about now is the personal impact I want to have on the world, right? I want the world to be able to create unique, interesting experiences that get out to large communities, large people, without needing to work at one of the like 5 big technology companies. That's mine. You might have your own, you might not yet, that's okay. So yeah, so that's my second thing. Be very clear on the change you want to make. My last story here, I'll explain the kind of strange title I have here, the R equals BZ, but this is about a guy named Boris Barsky, but everyone calls him BZ. And I think, around the Mozilla project, Ask BZ was probably the most uttered phrase for years. He was one of those people who, still is one of these people who seems to know like everything. You heard my bio, the first few projects I worked on. First project I worked on, BZ will review for you. He'll let you know how it's going. He'll mentor you there. Cool. Finished that. It was a little tough. He's a really, he really understands things, really helps you get the right thing done. Went on to my next project, totally different thing. Oh yeah, BZ will help you there too. BZ was, fantastically productive. I think in the 20 years he was working on Mozilla, he completed somewhere north of 12,000 changes to the Firefox code base. But what was like more interesting and more sort of flooring than the 12,000 changes he made himself to the code base, he reviewed nearly 20,000 changes. And when BZ reviewed your code, he was always thorough. He would always let you know ways you could improve what you were doing. He would always let you give you new ways to think about it, help you understand things you might not understand. But he was always super friendly about it. Which, I frankly still don't know how he had that amount of patience. He probably reviewed 30, 40 of my patches early in my career. And every time I sort of felt bad that this brilliant programmer was spending all of his time helping me figure out what was wrong with my code. And then when I looked up actually this week and found out it was actually around 20,000 times he did that for people. It's really impressive, right? And it really helped a lot of people. So at some point, pretty recently, after 20 years of being at Mozilla, Boris decided, he wanted to move on. He wanted to go do something else. Totally reasonable, totally makes sense. I was, I was in charge of Firefox at the time, and my first reaction was absolute panic, because I knew that, when I had started, when I was writing code on the project 15 years ago, Boris was the one that knew everything. Boris was the one that did everything. How are we going to continue without Boris? But then he left, and when he left, he sent an email that said, it was a long email. It said, it was a goodbye, but it said for this thing I'm good at, this person knows what they're doing. For that thing I'm good at, that person knows what they're doing. And I realized that he had made sure that someone else knew everything that he knew, could take care of everything that he'd left. And he'd invested all that time over the years that he invested teaching people, helping them understand, making them better programmers. He was able to just walk away. And of course, we'll always miss Boris's direct contributions, but to this, he's going to continue to influence Firefox development for years without writing another line of code for Firefox. And so that last strategy that I would encourage you to take home is teach and mentor. It's the easiest path to having long-lived impact on the world. It'll outlast your involvement on any given project. It makes your team better because they're learning something from you. It makes you better. It's kind of cliche, but when you teach somebody something, you realize what you don't understand about it, and then you can start to develop that real understanding. And I would also encourage you to start early. There's always something that somebody else does not know, and taking that time to help teach them will, again, make you better. It'll make everyone better. And I have one bonus tip. I don't have a story connected to this one. It's just true. Writing is awesome. Write a lot. This is one I picked up pretty late in my career, and I wish I'd picked up earlier. The most valuable superpower anyone can have is the ability to efficiently put a clear idea in someone else's brain. And good writing is the best way to do that. It scales well. You only have to write once, and then you can put that idea in countless people's heads. Like teaching, it's a great way to help figure out what you don't know. And yeah, I'm telling you, it's a superpower. Work on it. It's definitely worth your time, no matter what your field of primary work is. So to wrap this up, I'm talking a bit faster. That's good. Mastering your craft is great. Be a great software engineer. Be a great designer. Look for ways to be that sort of super productive programmer, but look for ways to multiply that effort. Look for ways to be more than just a programmer, or more than just a designer, more than just what you are, because that ability to help lead people, teach people, bring people along, give people clarity is incredibly important, and is what will give you that sort of lasting impact on the world. You know, like Funvi, like know what impact you want to have, know what you're trying to get done in the world, and let everything else, melt away while you focus on that. Like Miguel, build these teams that help you have the impact that can outlast your specific involvement, that can do things that you never thought you could figure out how to do, you could never do on your own. And like BZ, teach and mentor people that to sharpen the team, to make everyone better and improve yourself. And then write. It's a totally undervalued skill. So yeah, with that, thanks for taking the time. I'm around for a while to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Camp. So I think for the AMA part, what we can do is there are a few pre-submitted questions that were submitted before this event. So I can ask you some of those while people start sending in their questions live.
Sure.
So the first question was, a lot of the students at DevHacks Global 2.0 are in college or high school. Could you talk a little bit about your experience in high school and college and how it helped you with your career?
Sure, yeah. So I talked a little bit about all that hobby project I worked on in college that got me involved in Gnome. I really enjoyed college. I didn't finish. Don't follow me on that one. But I actually, I didn't tell the whole story there. But so I was totally, like, I was so into coding at the time. I still enjoy it, but. So I spent a bunch of time in my CS classes trying to learn as much as I could. And I spent a lot of time on these hobby projects. Like I said, and this one that ended up getting Miguel's attention. And, at the time, a year or two after that, and Miguel and Nat Friedman went and started a company, and they hired me pretty early on. So I ended up not finishing college. But I think, generally speaking, in high school and college, it's a great time to learn. It's a great time to not focus on having to hit deadlines. You can spend that time to really understand and learn things. You can meet people. You can develop those team building skills. The number one thing I learned in college, partially from Miguel, but also from my classmates and teachers, is you can't do it all alone. You got to work together. You got to learn how to work with people. So yeah, fun time.
Yeah, sounds good. So we just had a question in the chat that's slightly related. But what sorts of opportunities and suggestions do you have to high school and college students in DevHacks that they can participate in?
Sure. So two broad things. I think events like this, hackathons, great place to learn to meet teams, work with people, solve problems and constraints. The other thing, like I said, when I started on Gnome, and it's still true today, open source is a great way to sort of find a team. You can work on some of that code together. You can learn how people work together, and you can have an impact. The cool thing about open source, you can put a small bit of code out, and you can help other people get work they want to get done more quickly. So there's certainly some downsides to open source from time to time, but overall, I think spending time getting your code out there, letting people see it and teach. The number one thing I learned from open source is it's really easy to be sort of scared to show your work. but what you'll get out of it is worth it every time. Like when Boris BZ would review my code, it always hurt my ego, but it always made me a better developer.
Thank you. So just a kind of slightly different question, but could you talk a little bit more about the day-to-day of your job?
Sure. So my job has changed a lot over the years. Like I said, I started as, or like you said, it started as an engineer. These days, I split my time pretty regularly between one-on-ones. And so what I'm doing in these one-on-ones is it's really just I'm meeting with the folks I work most closely with, and I just ask, what's on your mind? What are you thinking? What's causing you trouble? What are you happy about? What's working well? What's not working well? And on some days everybody's doing great, and it's just a matter of saying like, hey, keep going. That's awesome. It's wonderful. Keep it up. Sometimes people are having trouble, and then I just this is the same as when I was doing engineering. Like we just solve problems. So we sit down in these one-on-ones. We say, what could we do differently? What could we do better? What's getting in our way? So that's the first sort of third of my time is these one-on-ones, really working through problems. The second is group meetings, and these are usually like my peers, my team that I'm a part of, and the team that I lead. We'll sit down and we'll just talk through the biggest problems that we're facing as a company, our biggest opportunities, and how we want to move forward. These are generally very creative meetings. They can be tough sometimes, but these are where we all sort of invest in that team and how we're going to work together and how we're going to be crystal clear what change we want to make, what impact we want to have, and how we're going to have that impact. And then the last third is writing. Like I said, that writing takes up a huge portion of my time. Because a lot of the work of a senior executive is taking complex things and simplifying them so that you can communicate them as simply as possible, and then taking very simple things and trying to break them into actionable next steps.
Do you still spend time developing code as part of your job?
I do not as part of my job. I do, however, do it as a hobby. I still love it, and so I still on weekends. I work on little video game projects and stuff just because I enjoy it so much.
Great. So someone just asks, do you have any advice for building teams where everyone works remotely? What sorts of apps do you like to use?
Yeah, that's a great question. I spend a lot of time on Zoom, like a lot. I haven't found any substitute for getting on the phone with somebody, or the video, getting face to face with someone and talking through their problems. That said, this is another area where writing is good. Like when I, early in my career, before I ever went and worked for a company, all of our communication would be over email, and just talking through what we were doing on email and IRC, which is not as popular anymore, I suppose. But yeah, I think it's always true of teams, but I think it's even more when it's remote. Over communicate. Say never assume that somebody's thinking what you're thinking. But other than that, yeah, Zoom, Google Docs for writing things together turns out to be a fun tool. And of course, your GitHub and tools for talking about code can be pretty helpful too.
Great. So someone also asks, do you think mentoring at events would be a good way to work on social skills? And I guess to expand on that, what are some other ways that programmers can work on their social skills?
Yeah, mentoring is a great way to work on social skills. It's basically the first way I ever did it. I am as awkward as they come. I'm as bad at social skills as they come. But when I realized at one point, similar to what I've been talking about today, that I was only going to get so far, by writing code. And if I wanted to really be able to change things, really be able to get things done that were bigger than the code I could write, I needed to learn. And mentoring ended up being a really, really good way to do that. It helps you practice clarity, helps you practice empathy, and it helps you practice, teaching, which is really important to all of this. The other things that have helped me in the past is just asking people that you're working with, what's going well, what's going bad. The thing that, like I said, I'm a pretty awkward person, but the thing that always has opened up conversations for me is to make sure that, help the other person start the conversation, see what's working for them, what's not working for them. There's a term you may have heard called rubber ducking, which is where you just explain your problem to a rubber duck, and then when you're explaining the problem, you figure it out. Spend time being a rubber duck for someone else, and it's a good way to start learning that skill of sort of making other people successful instead of yourself.
Okay, so another question was, I know everyone dreams of being a founder, a co-founder, president, vice president, etc. But what sorts of responsibilities come with that position? And do you think that it's a good fit for everybody?
Definitely not a good fit for everybody. I think so. The responsibility, I've never been a founder. I've never been that sort of sole person responsible for everything. I've been, I'm in charge of Firefox now, so I'm responsible for a lot. And a few things to consider. One is that, founders, leaders don't always get to spend as much of their time thinking about the thing they want to do. You end up you have to spend time thinking about payroll, taxes, right? Ideally you can hire people to help with that, but at the end of the day, there's this set of responsibilities for other people's well-being, for other people's jobs, that can distract some types of folks from being able to really focus on the core. Some people are to help them deal with those things. Other people don't. I find, generally speaking, people have things they love to do. For me, it's coding, but it's also it's like helping people. It's teaching people how to fish, so to speak. So for me, founding isn't really where I want to be, and it's okay if it's not where you want to be. If it is where you want to be, it's certainly exciting. People like that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm not sure that's the best answer in the world, but certainly don't feel like you have to be a founder to have a big impact. I think if you talk to a lot of founders, I bet you'll find that they have a set of 1 or 2, 3 people that work with them that have huge impact, probably as big as they do it, because they don't have to deal with that sort of top level finding investors and PR and that sort of thing.
Great. Someone just asks, could you talk a little bit about the work that Mozilla is doing with respect to internet safety and making the internet better and safer? Yeah,
sure. So this is one of the things that Mozilla treats as sort of a core mission of ours. We need the world. We believe the internet is a wonderful place, wonderful thing that people get a lot of value from, but it needs to be safe. And our focus right now on the Firefox side is privacy and security. And so we spend a great deal of time working on tools to, first of all, harden your software so that it's not able to be compromised by third parties. And also privacy. We want to make sure that you have some sense of who is looking at you, who knows what about you, and some ability to control that. My peer organization, Pocket, is also spending time on thinking through how to get people information that is reliable, trustworthy, and represents people from different backgrounds et cetera, without being sort of overrun by misinformation. And so those are kind of the primary things we're doing at the Mozilla Corporation to explore that, but we're also looking for other ways to have impact there too.
Someone just asked, where does the name Firefox come from? And I guess in addition to that, maybe you could talk a little bit about the founding of Firefox itself.
Sure. So in the beginning, there was Mosaic, right? So Mosaic was a web browser, and it was created by, I always blank on the name of the organization that created it. And then Netscape Navigator was born, and Netscape Navigator was originally called the Mosaic Killer, which was shortened to Mozilla. After Netscape Communicator was open sourced, the project was called Mozilla, and it was this big giant front end that was a browser, an email client, a website generator, a Usenet newsreader, and I think one or two other things, right? It's this big, giant, massive piece of software. And pair of folks, Blake Ross and I want to say Ben Goodger, but I'm bad at remembering names, had this vision of like the thing they wanted to see happen in the world was just a browser, just a simple browser that did as little as possible other than just render the web, render it well, and have add-ons that could add new functionality to it. And they called it Phoenix because it was like a phoenix rising from the ashes from the from the ashes of Netscape Communicator and the Mozilla Communication Suite. It was called Phoenix. But there are trademark issues. They couldn't use that word, so they made it a pretty more, an even more sort of. They basically call it Firebird after, because that's what a phoenix is. It's a firebird, so they just called it Firebird. Turns out that name was taken too, and so I don't know exactly who thought of the Firefox, which is the name of Red Panda, but they just changed it from Firebird to Firefox. So that's where that name came from. The rest is history.
Interesting. Yes. So one more person has asked, what are your opinions on FOSS and how does FOSS make a difference?
Sure. So free and open source software, I think, is, like I said, it's I've only ever worked on FOSS my whole career. So for me, at least, it's been hugely impactful. I think there's a lot of good that comes from it. I think the general idea, I think it sort of embodies and probably helped focus me on that ability for one person to have widespread impact. And so that's sort of the positive side of FOSS, right? You can build, like one person can build a library that can end up being used in software everywhere because they make it easy to use, they make it easy to adopt, and then other people can start to contribute to it, and you build these communities, you build these teams. It's really kind of a perfect training ground, microcosm of the sorts of things I've been talking about. There's some downsides too. I think we're starting to see it more as open source matures. We're starting to see there's some downsides to having built something on your spare time, maybe, that then hundreds of thousands of people are relying on, and it creates some stress without clear compensation that is being considered. Some of my friends started a company called Tidelift to try and help solve that, but I think that's certainly a thing that people are spending time trying to figure out. But overall, I think, like I said, open source has been a great addition to the world.
Thank you. So it looks like we're getting a little bit close to the end at 7:45. So maybe to finish it off, if you could just give one piece of advice or one suggestion that the hackers at DevHacks should take from this whole event, what should it be?
I think it boils down to software is made by people, and you can get good at coding, but you also you multiply that by how good you are at working with other people.